Good evening. There are calls for more support for businesses that will be operating under new Tier 2 restrictions from tomorrow. That's as Walsall joins 4 other areas in the West Midlands in local lockdown. Well, the new rules for those classed as high-risk areas will mean households can't mix indoors anywhere, including in hospitality venues, leaving many of them fearing for their futures. Andy Bevan sent this report from Walsall.
Drinkers at the Tap and Tanner in Walsall know as much as anyone else that the town's infection rate has been rising, and now it joins Birmingham, Sandwell, Solihull and Wolverhampton in the high-risk category, Tier 2 of the government's 3-tier alert system. From tomorrow, people in Walsall and the other high-risk areas in the West Midlands won't be able to meet with their friends or family inside a pub, or inside anywhere else for that matter, only with people who are in their household or their bubble. But if your local has an outdoor area like this, then you still can meet with friends or family, but only if you stick to the rule of 6. Already having to close the doors each night by 10 p.m, the landlady here fears the tighter restrictions will keep even more customers away.
It's going to slow us down a hell of a lot. Not many people are going to want to come out. If they can't sit with their friends and that, they're not going to want to come out, so it's going to slow us down even more. Just trying to keep everybody safe, sanitising all the stations all the time and just trying to keep it clean and a safe environment for them all.
Walsall Council says it's committed to helping businesses affected by the new measures as much as it can.
It's vital that any government support that is out there they must apply for. If they've got any real problems to get in touch with the council. We have supported many hundreds of businesses during the last lockdown in the borough, and I would ask them to really keep an eye out on what support there is out there for them.
There is government financial help in Liverpool, at present the only area in the country in the very high-risk Tier 3 category, with grants for closed businesses and 2/3 of wages for furloughed staff. But Tier 2 areas like Walsall won't get that money, despite facing a huge drop in trade and some staff working shorter hours for less pay. The TUC in the Midlands says that's wrong.
When those companies do go back to full capacity, those hours are going to be needed. And what we're saying is don't put them on the job scrap heap, don't make them unemployed. Let's keep them at work, let's keep them doing things, let's subsidise those short hours that people are going to face due to impacts on demand.
As a business owner myself, I think we'd be better off shut than trying to cope under those conditions.
I don't think there's a right and wrong answer, but something does have to be done because people are getting ill, people are dying.
I think as well people are getting a bit fed up of everything now and they're just doing their own thing and just doing what they want.
If everybody keeps to the rules like they should have done, we wouldn't have been in this mess now.
All this comes on the day that the minutes of a recent meeting of the SAGE committee revealed public health officials called for tighter restrictions, even a 2-week total lockdown, a so-called circuit break, to stem the spread of the virus.
From public health restrictions, these measures don't go far enough. What actually we want to see is lack of mixing between households in outdoor spaces, because we are concerned that the measures don't go far enough.
But for now, most of the West Midlands will stay within Tier 2, high risk, and with it, high anxiety. Andy Bevan, ITV News.
Well, Coventry is actually on a par with Walsall when it comes to the infection rate. The latest figures show Coventry has a rate of 138 cases per 100,000 people, while Walsall has exactly the same at 138. Yet Coventry remains in Tier 1, essentially under the previous national guidelines of Rule of 6 and the 10 p.m. curfew, while Walsall and 4 other areas in the West Midlands are Tier 2. Leaders in Coventry said today they were surprised that the city had not been moved up, and they warned people not to be complacent. Yasmin Bottleby explains.
In a country that's now in tears, people in Coventry had a reason to feel happy today. The government's put the city in the lowest level for new coronavirus restrictions, meaning the rules stay the same as they previously were. That's despite COVID-19 rates of 138 cases per 100,000 people.
I was surprised, bearing in mind our numbers in terms of certainly the number of per 100,000 were relatively high, and certainly those of our West Midlands colleagues that were in Tier 2, the higher tier, actually had numbers that were lower than ours. but then realising some of the local context of where our numbers are going up from, some of the work that we've been doing to really get after some of the outbreaks, I think that was the factor as to why we remain for the time being in that lower tier.
Predominantly, it's 18 to 21-year-olds, and often in halls of residence setting. So we are working with the universities, we are obviously working with the schools, and we're working with people in respect to outbreaks, where outbreaks have happened, and we've dealt with those effectively.
Doing that includes working with the University of Coventry to increase testing. They currently have around 30 students with the virus, whereas nearby Warwick University has a more established testing programme that's identified more than 200 current cases. People in the city generally feel the local response is right.
I don't think any of us are happy about the situation, are we? But seems sensible given that we're doing fairly well compared to some of our neighbours.
Worry a little bit about certain areas where there seem to be more clusters. I'm not sure what the answer is to that.
With the recent rise in infections, I think it should go up a notch. However, at the minute, the city seems to be coping with what it has.
And the City Council agree. They said today they wouldn't hesitate to seek stronger restrictions if they felt they were needed.
There certainly is no room for complacency in Coventry. We've seen our numbers go up in Coventry. Our rate is going up on a daily basis at the moment, and whereas we are still below most of the areas in the combined authority, that gap is reducing. So we really do have to all take this very seriously.
And the hope is that if everyone does, Coventry will stay where it is, in Tier 1. Yasmin Bottleby, ITV News.
Well, for more on this, we can speak to our political correspondent, Alison Mackenzie. And Alison, there's a lot of confusion, but there's also a lot of criticism over the level of support that's being offered to the businesses affected.
Yes, that's right. You heard in Andy Bevan's report the irony. If you're in Tier 3, no one's in Tier 3 in the West Midlands, but they get 2/3 of wages if the pubs have to shut. But if you're in Tier 2, the businesses have to limp on, do the best they can, while knowing that customers been affected. It was raised in the House of Commons in an urgent question, a question from the Dudley South MP, Mike Wood. He said, what about these businesses in the Midlands? What can you offer as support?
The Chancellor set out the wider package of support, recognising the concerns that my honourable friend speaks of, with the tax deferrals, with the loans, with the business rate support, with the measures on VAT, which are targeted at the sector of which he speaks for the very real concerns he quite correctly articulates.
In other words, the government's saying we're giving packages of support, please live with what we're handing over to you. Lots of frustration later in the Commons from all sides of the House, wondering about the mixed messages. Why is it that some are in Tier 1? Why is it in Tier 2? How can that change? How long will they all last? And there was this reply from Karen Bradley, the Staffordshire Moorlands MP. She had a story to tell.
My family has for 53 years run a pub, from my grandfather to my father and now my brother. And they've never faced anything like this in all that time. I say to my right honourable friend, I recognise why he's doing what he's doing, and I agree with him. Schools and workplaces, etc., have to be our priority. But we also have to think about those businesses that have spent thousands on making themselves COVID ready and now face a very uncertain future.
Alison, another area of concern is protecting your health. And can you tell us what the updated advice is for those who are shielding and perhaps are vulnerable?
Yes, a lot of people this affects in the Midlands, doesn't it? A new advice today linked to that Tier 3 system introduced by the government. Let's look at the facts of it. Medium, that's the majority of the country in England. Maintain social distancing, meet outside if possible, keep the number of different people you meet low, shop at quieter times of the day. If you're in a high category, and that does affect, as we know, big chunks of the West Midlands, and you're vulnerable, meeting other people must be outside. Reduce the number of shop trips you make and ask others for help. And if you're in the very high category, not yet affecting the Midlands, you should stay at home as much as possible and ask people in your support bubble to collect food and medicines for you. But the news breaking tonight is that Keir Starmer, the Labour opposition leader, he's come out calling for a 2 to 3 week circuit break. That blank on everything apart from schools. He says shut everything to get this virus under control. He says Boris Johnson's government is simply failing in that key task.
It's a lot of information to take in. Alison, thank you very much. Well, with the new system being brought in, we've been sent lots of questions on our social media pages asking for answers. So hopefully we can give you some clarity on a few of the common concerns. We'll start with Ellie Wade, who, among others, asked this question: are support bubbles banned in Birmingham? Well, Birmingham is in Tier 2, and under those rules, support bubbles are allowed. Now remember, to qualify as being in a support bubble, the network you form can only be between 2 households exclusively, so you can't change who is in your bubble on a daily basis, and one of those households in the bubble must have a person who lives alone. So in other words, 2 couples don't count as being in a support bubble. Our next question is from Sharon Bullock in Walsall, who is also newly in Tier 2, incidentally, and she says, I work from home as a nail and eyelash technician, and I have clients who enter my house for work. All my clients use the test and trace QR code. I'm strict with cleaning and I always wear PPE. So what do the new rules mean for me? Well, Sharon, the government told us that working in the home is listed as an exemption, so you can meet someone in a home for work purposes, providing that you follow safety guidance such as completing risk assessments, regularly cleaning, wearing PPE and keeping the house well ventilated, to name a few, and that certainly sounds exactly what you're doing. Also, Kev Taylor, who is in a Tier 2 area as well, says, I live on my own but regularly go elsewhere for overnight stays. Can this carry on? Well, the short answer is yes. If you're a Tier 2 resident, overnight stays are permitted, providing social contact rules are again obeyed. Now, it's also worth noting that in this tier, it's advised that you reduce the amount of travel you do as much as possible and you avoid going into any Tier 3 areas. There's just a flavour of some of the questions coming in. So thank you to everybody who got in touch, and we hope that it has given you a few answers. And indeed, there will be more, I'm sure, in the days to come. Now, with changes to restrictions and further restrictions coming in, it is not surprising that many people feel very low at times. We asked a psychotherapist from Tutbury near Burton-upon-Trent to share some tips on how to try to remain positive during the pandemic.
We have to remember, if we look back in history, viruses do stop. This will come to an end, and we need to keep that in mind. It's really important to have that little bit of positivity. And also, I think we have to come back to the present. What is beautiful today? Have I had a cup of tea? Did I chat with a mate? Did I watch something comedic on telly that made me laugh out loud? Laughter is really important at the moment. When it's so glum and so difficult and so scary, we need to work really hard to find something that we enjoy, like a big jumper. I don't know about you, but it's freezing today. Put a huge jumper on to go out. That was a good moment. I felt cosy.
Yes, we've got to take every day as it comes, hasn't we? Now, coronavirus has changed the way that we live our lives. And this week we have a special series hearing from people for whom that change has been pronounced. Tonight, we meet a woman from Shrewsbury who nearly lost her life to COVID-19 back in March. After 26 days in intensive care, she survived and she now has a new zest for life. Hannah Bechelet has the first in our series, The Virus and Me.
This celebration at leaving the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital COVID-free is something Sally Perrin's family were told was unlikely to happen.
I got what I thought was flu. It turned out to be COVID and I was taken into hospital. And then within about a day, I can't actually remember the time scale, I was rushed into ICU. And at that point, I just felt so ill. I just wanted to be out of there. And that was the last I knew for 26 days, apparently.
It was a very frightening experience because she was so critically ill, and I didn't know whether she would come home. On several occasions I had calls from doctors and consultants saying that they didn't think she'd make it, so it was very distressing.
I had to learn to, obviously, to talk, to feed myself, to lift my head, to sit up. It was just like being a baby. Bit of a surprise when I came to, and the whole world had changed. It was totally different. Things like the shops. Obviously, you couldn't just go shopping. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't see anybody. It was just so completely different.
As well as coronavirus changing the world, it's changed Sally too.
Taste is weird a lot of the time. Quite often I'm tasting metal and other weird stuff. It just tastes wrong. My lungs, obviously, you can hear with my voice at the moment, it's quite strained, it's not normal. But that, again, comes and goes. I'm losing my hair, which as a female is obviously very much defines how you feel. So in a way it's upsetting. It's not the end of the world. I can always wear a wig.
And this is a couple who are used to seeing the positives in life.
I share her view that she's got a second chance and therefore I got a second chance, and that's one of the main reasons why I gave up work, to spend more time with her and we can do things together.
It has changed the way I think about things, more living for the day. I've been really lucky getting a second chance, so I want to make the most of that and do as much as I can.
And we wish Sally a continued recovery. Well, tomorrow we'll be speaking to Dr. Samira Hassan. She's had to adapt how she works as a GP during the pandemic by treating patients at home, as well as becoming a source of important information for the Somali community. 1 in 10 grassroots sports clubs do not expect to survive the next 12 months. That's according to a new survey. On average, clubs lost half their income because of pandemic restrictions, and some lost all of their income. Well, there are fears that community facilities like these could be lost forever, as Kevin Ashford reports.
Gornal Athletic has a history stretching back decades. The current incarnation of the Black Country Football Club dates from the end of the Second World War. The side has had its ups and downs over the years, but lockdown has proved to be one of the toughest tests yet.
If it hadn't have been for the funding we had from the Football Foundation and the local government grant for small businesses, we'd have probably really struggled. I mean, it's been a godsend starting the football as it is now, letting supporters in. We played one home game in the league and we had the maximum here, 300, which is helping. As I say, but if without the funding, I'd have thought, same as us as a lot of clubs, we'd have struggled.
Across the country, there are signs that the lockdown is going to have a long-lasting effect on grassroots sport. For example, there are some 38,000 football teams at this level, and according to a survey carried out for an energy-saving campaign, since lockdown, those clubs' incomes have dropped on average by almost a half. In the worst cases, the fall in income was catastrophic. The result is that 10% of grassroots football clubs don't expect to survive the next 12 months.
How old are you guys?
The former England and Aston Villa goalkeeper David James still has strong memories of the club where he started his footballing career, and says such teams play a crucial role.
It's not just about producing the next Harry Kane or the next Raheem Sterling or the next Kelly Smith. It's about having an opportunity for the local community to utilise these facilities. As I say, I come down here, play on the pitches. I use the hall in there for darts was my favourite recreation, or even just going to the bar, socialising and drinking lemonade. I mean, it's part of the social fabric.
Finance isn't the only issue. The grass pitches here are in good condition, but the governing body for groundsmen and women says that's not the case for many community pitches around the country. Lockdown ruled out maintenance, and that exacerbated a pre-pandemic shortage of volunteers to look after them.
The future might be that there are less viable pitches, that the children are not able to enjoy the sport. With the rise of women's sport, more pitches is more important now than it probably ever has been. And it will just increase and get worse and worse. And unfortunately, it will be our children and our communities that will suffer.
So COVID restrictions, financial pressures and a need for more helpers means it's going to be a tough few months for many of the clubs at the heart of our communities. Kevin Ashford, ITV News.
7 months on from the death of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter protesters from the region say there's still a long way to go in tackling racism and inequality. The killing of the 46-year-old by police in America in May sparked waves of protests around the world. During Black History Month, Nick Smith reports on what progress has been made since then.
The death of George Floyd may have happened 4,000 miles away from this Black Lives Matter demonstration in Birmingham. But for these protesters, the pain and anguish of his experience provoked an outcry for change, which is still ongoing.
I believe it's too early, far too early to say that whether we've seen a change. I believe that there still are some very uncomfortable conversations that need to be had to really kind of look at the British Empire and also colonialism before we even look at trying to, move the country forward in terms of creating an equal society.
Global civil rights movements throughout the 20th century went a long way to try and eradicate segregation and to implement laws to tackle discrimination. But many feel this didn't go far enough. And here in the 21st century, many black people and others from minority backgrounds still face racism or unconscious bias. Julian Abobu and Jennifer Ogunleye are both PR and marketing professionals. They've been running online seminars to try and tackle issues of race in the workplace and told me they're encouraging companies not just to be inclusive, but to actively confront racism.
You can't just hire people and then think that the job is done there. It becomes really important to make sure that there is that equity in terms of how people are being treated, and when it comes to promotion, when it comes to salary, when it comes to an inclusive workforce. Some of the experiences that people of black heritage and minority ethnic heritage have experienced, people have been talking about those experiences openly for a long time. So how do you address those issues when they come to you? How is your workplace inclusive? How do you respond? Those are questions that people need to be asking and to be addressing urgently.
We also need to understand that change is not going to be quick. And sometimes it might not seem like we're moving in the right direction. But if we're able to see things, call them out, and be accountable, then eventually, down the line, we are going to see progress.
Signs of solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement are now commonplace. From our elite sports stars to performances on primetime television. But many feel it's just a starting point, and the real change is yet to come.
I do believe in moving the needle forward by a millimetre, bit by bit. And what Black Lives Matter, the amplification of it, has done is moved it forward a millimetre. It's opened up space for what can be considered as uncomfortable conversation. It's made people more aware of the things they could be doing to be anti-racist. So looking at it from that perspective, we've moved forward a notch. It will never be enough for me, in my opinion, but we're getting somewhere.
So those supporting the fight for equality want to ensure it isn't just perceived as a single moment in history, but the catalyst for continual change, which will eventually lead to a fairer society for all. Nick Smith, ITV News.
Hello, thank you for joining me. Well, in just a few hours' time, parts of our region will be subject to stricter coronavirus restrictions. The three-tier system announced by the government yesterday classifies local authority areas as being on medium, high or very high alert. So let's remind ourselves of where our region sits within that system. The most severe of the tiers, Tier 3, is the very high-risk category, where restrictions include the closure of bars and pubs. Nowhere in our region has been placed in this tier. However, the high-risk category, Tier 2, includes all of South and West Yorkshire and Bassetlaw in North Nottinghamshire. So if you live in one of those areas, then mixing indoors with different households will not be allowed. And that now includes both private homes and hospitality venues like pubs and restaurants. The rule of 6 applies outdoors, including private gardens. Now, the lowest tier of restrictions is Tier 1, where coronavirus is considered to be medium risk. The the rest of the Look North region, so that's North Yorkshire, East Derbyshire, Bolsover and Chesterfield, they fit into this category, meaning different households can still mix in any setting, but with a limit of 6 people. Social distancing must still be observed and hospitality venues will continue to close at 10 p.m. Now, Bassetlaw has the lowest rate of coronavirus infections in our entire region. But as we've just mentioned, it's been placed in Tier 2, the high-risk category, after Nottinghamshire County Council requested the same measures for the whole of the county. Now, this has caused quite frustration for some, as Ian White reports.
The district of Bassetlaw has the lowest infection rate in the Look North region. But as part of Nottinghamshire, it's facing the same controls as other parts of the county, where numbers are among the highest in England.
Just ask people what you think about Worksop being lumped into the restrictions with the rest of Nottinghamshire.
Oh, we're just saying it's all nonsense.
Do you really? Yeah, why do you think that?
Because its rate is low here.
This restriction, I think it's a load of cobs wallops, to be honest.
It's either blanket punishment or not at all, because it's like my dad lives in Derbyshire. He's got completely different restrictions to what I've got.
The local MP has questioned the restrictions imposed on Bassetlaw and says the council should have helped him oppose them.
We know that the outbreaks in Nottingham City have been very serious and the areas surrounding there. So I think it's only sensible that actions are taken. We weren't necessarily convinced that they were right for us at this particular time in North Nottinghamshire. So we're asking for those restrictions to be looked at on a local basis. But unfortunately, we'll all be included in it.
This afternoon, Bassetlaw's council leader said there was sense and science behind the area being in Tier 2 restrictions.
These are decisions made by the Health Secretary, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak. Those are in London, with laws enacted in London that the MP is responsible for. So I think the MP needs to take his grievances elsewhere, because the priority has to be tackling the COVID-19 crisis here, supporting people here.
After floods last November and closure during the first virus peak, Susan Hale says her business is suffering.
I would have rather put us in Tier 1 or in Tier 3, where we would have got the financial help in Tier 3. In Tier 2, I've had bookings cancelled already, and I'm not getting no financial help from that. So what are we supposed to do? We're just lumbered in an area that has got a lot of greyness to it. There needs to be a lot more guidance and control with that, and there isn't any for the industry at all. You know, I've survived 8 months being closed. Let's hope I can make it through Christmas.
If infections continue to rise rapidly in Nottingham and other parts of the county, Bassetlaw could see itself placed in even tighter controls, even if rates here remain low. Ian White, BBC Look North, Worksop.
And clearly a lot of frustration in Bassetlaw there. Our reporter Phil Bodmer is with me now. As we heard, Bassetlaw has the lowest rate of coronavirus infections, whereas Leeds and Sheffield have the highest. What are the local authorities saying in the cities tonight?
Well, the local authorities and civic leaders, directors of public health have been giving us an update today, Amy, to bring us to exactly where we are at this moment in time. Clearly, it's a very movable situation which can change on a daily basis. I think the prevailing question today from reporters to the civic leaders was, where are we likely to go next? And also what the feeling was about the high risk, getting into that high risk situation. This is what the Director of Public Health had to tell us in Sheffield.
Things are moving in spaces of days and weeks, not months. So if it happens, it's going to be weeks away at most. So I think it's only a matter of when, not if, but it's impossible to predict when, to be honest. The job for all of us is to make sure the economic support package is as robust as it possibly can be.
So we know Sheffield has the highest rate of infection in our region, but what about West Yorkshire? Where does it sit?
Well, Kirklees, Calderdale, Bradford and more recently Leeds have been in tougher measures, Amy, but that hasn't stopped those rates rising. And the leader of Leeds City Council said today they wanted more information from the government about the effectiveness of the curfew.
Question to government is to show us the evidence that is basing their assumptions that the spread of the virus is highest in hospitality settings. We haven't as yet seen that evidence. Our concern is by restricting safe mixing in public spaces that we might encourage more people to socially mix under the radar in households where we know the transmission rate is high.
Well, that new tiering system is meant to bring more local control and perhaps more clarity, but we saw from the people in works up there, clarity doesn't necessarily follow and people still are confused by the rules. And obviously in Bassett Law, what happens is there are iniquities because Bassett Law with a very low level gets put into a high level along with the rest of Nottingham.
Phil, we've had loads of questions from viewers, as always, when there are rule changes. Let's start with one from Lynn Robertson. She asks, are weddings and wedding receptions still going ahead?
Yes, weddings in tiers 1, 2 and 3 are still going ahead with up to 15 guests for a ceremony and a reception. However, if you're in tier 3, you can have a ceremony with up to 15 people, but no sit-down meal.
Lots of people asking the same question as Ivan Barker from Chesterfield. He says he's in Tier 1, Chesterfield. Can he travel to Sheffield, which is Tier 2, to go shopping in an indoor setting? And also, can he meet a friend for a coffee indoors in Sheffield?
Yes, he can travel to Sheffield. There's no restriction on shopping. As regards to having a coffee, he can with a friend. If it's outside, he can't meet in an indoor setting.
OK, I have another question. I don't know where it's gone, actually. Oh, here we go. We have another question from
Sue Croft, I think.
Sue
it was
Croft.
about
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Well done. You're on it. Sue Croft. She wants to know if workmen can enter the house if they adhere to social distancing.
Yes, if you've got a plumbing problem or you need an electrician or a carpet fitter, they can still come, providing you practice social distancing.
Duncan from Barnsley says, I collect my grandchildren from school in Sheffield. I take them to their home and wait for their parents to come home. Is this still allowed?
Yes, Duncan can still do that. It comes under childcare, so he's still able to go and pick the kids up from school, drop them at his parents' house and wait for them to come home.
Brilliant, thank you. Brilliant, Phil. Thank you for that. Answering questions for you at home. Hope that's made things clearer. You can also find out what the rules are in your area by entering your postcode on this page of the BBC website. You can find it by typing bbc.co.uk/news into your browser. Next tonight, the Chief Medical Officer at Leeds Teaching Hospitals has asked the public for help during the coronavirus pandemic by using services wisely. Dr Phil Wood says the Trust is prepared to deal with the added pressures this winter, but everyone needs to play their part. Our health correspondent Jamie Coulson has been speaking to him.
Leeds Teaching Hospitals is one of our biggest and busiest trusts. Today, the Chief Medical Officer spoke about their plans to deal with a second wave of COVID. Infections have been rising. Hospital admissions are on the increase. How concerned are you?
Well, we know that Leeds has got high levels of COVID in the community. We know that that's been predominantly amongst the younger age group. But we also know that the risk of that then spreading to the older age group, those with other medical conditions, becomes higher. If you go back a few weeks, we had a handful of patients. We've now got 105 patients in our hospital with COVID.
The first wave of this was challenging. As we look towards, a second wave, we've also got autumn and winter with the pressures that they bring. How will you cope?
Well, the NHS coped extremely well in the first wave. Our staff are incredibly committed. I think what's important is that we need the public's help in terms of only coming to our services if they need our services. So our emergency departments are quite busy, and we appreciate people are worried about their health, but we do need people to only come to the emergency department if they have an emergency.
In the first wave, critical care capacity was increased across the NHS, while non-urgent treatments were suspended. It led to backlogs, something the NHS wants to avoid repeating this time by keeping services running where possible. Is it inevitable that if COVID numbers continue to rise, then more patients are going to have to wait longer for some of these treatments?
Well, I would expect that we will have inevitably some patients with conditions where there is a clinical judgment that a delay of some weeks is safe. But what I can do is to give a commitment that if anybody requires urgent therapy, then our commitment is that we will do our absolute best to deliver that for them.
A lot of people will look to the winter, they'll hear about rising numbers, and will naturally be quite concerned. In terms of the hospital care here, can you reassure them about this winter?
Of course we're concerned about where the pandemic may progress to, but our focus on a daily basis has to be around how do we keep services safe for patients, how do we ensure that the quality of what we're delivering for them is as good as we can possibly make it.
And you're satisfied that it is good enough for what challenges may come?
Absolutely, I am satisfied.
Dr. Phil Wood there talking to Jamie Coulson. Well, one sector that has seen thousands of job losses is retail. Sales in shops fell by 9% in September and are 30% down on this time last year. One independent trader in Leeds has been telling us about he and his colleagues are coping.
Hi there, I'm James and I'm the owner of Flamingo's Coffee House in Central Arcade in the centre of Leeds City Centre. This has been our worst week ever for trading. It's been an absolute disaster. Never in the years that I've had this shop have I ever seen trade like it. But it's not just me that's struggling. All of the shops here in Central Arcade, all these lovely independent shops, are really struggling too. So let's go and have a look. Let's speak to Lisa in World of Dance. Hi Lisa, so you've obviously got World of Dance. Can this shop survive?
As it is at the moment, James, no, I don't think so. Unless things pick up or we get more help from the government, no.
When was it that things started to change and get really bad?
I think when they said about the 6th, people got a bit scared again, and there's a brewing about a local lockdown in Leeds, and I think people are just generally scared to go in the centre of Leeds. I mean, this week I've had days, just negative days, where I give them more back in refunds than I have in sales. It's just awful. I just can't see an end to it.
So this is Ecotopia. This is one of Leeds' only zero-waste plastic-free shops. We're going to have a chat with Sam, who's the owner.
I think some people are uncomfortable wearing face masks, even though it is supposed to give you a sense of security. They don't have that confidence to come out because some people just refuse to wear a face mask. So much, especially of what we sell, is available online as well. So a lot of people just prefer, let's stay home, do the shopping online and just play it safe. We've had a rent deferral, which will help in the short term, but in the long run it's only going to put more pressure on us. So I think only time will tell if that footfall increases and whether shopping in person does grow.
Now we're in Pebbles Hats in Central Arcade. Erdan, you've not been selling many wedding hats of late, have you?
No, since lockdown, wedding industry hats are not selling at all because there are no weddings, no races either, horse races. We are making, as you see there, some face masks to compensate, to get a bit money, but it's nowhere near to our loss, you know. So we are basically crippled.
That was just a few of the independent businesses in Central Arcade. As you can see, it's really tough times, we're all really struggling, and we just hope it gets back to some normality sometime soon.